welcome to Hay Kings Connections. We're back with Mr. Jeffrey Jackson with Cropland, and today we're going to talk about nitrates. And I know these warm season grasses, they can have nitrate issues, but so can cool season grasses. Maybe I can add a little bit of knowledge in on that.
That would be phenomenal. Okay, good. So do you want to start with cool season grass, or do I get to start with warm season grass?
I can start with cool season grasses.
All right. Talk to me about nitrates.
Yeah. So
how does that happen?
I come at this from, like, oats are a really common crop. Lots of folks have put up oats for hay. And
yes,
oats are kind of known for accumulating nitrates.
Yes,
now,
they are.
I'm going to tell you what I know, and then you can correct me. We went out there and put nitrogen fertilizer on that crop. And then the plant started to take up some of that nitrogen, and then it does magical things and converts it into proteins and all sorts of other stuff as that plant is growing. But if that plant gets stressed in some way, shape, or form, whether it's too much water, not enough water, cold temperatures, something that stops the growth of that plant, it stops the conversion of that nitrogen fertilizer into proteins in the plant. And it gets stuck in the form of nitrate. And that nitrate, in too high of concentrations, and I suspect we're going to talk about concentrations quite a bit, can be toxic. It can cause problems in livestock functions.
Yep.
So, am I close?
I would tell you that from a plant physiology standpoint, you went about as deep as I'm going to as well. So I love it. We're on the right playing field here.
Right. Nitrogen into proteins in the plant. If that process gets interrupted, it gets stuck in nitrate form. Too high in nitrates is bad.
So you'd be talking oats, spring wheat, barley, triticale, rye, any of those cereal grains like that, probably, right? Yep. How about Timothy and or some of those other?
It's possible.
Non-cereal type grasses.
And we actually do see some higher nitrates in for example, irrigated Timothy. But that can come with pushing fertilizer really hard, and then getting that growth disruption that can come with pushing fertilizer really hard and cutting it too early. Like there's some things that can happen, but you don't have to worry about it near as much as like with oats, for example.
Right on. So I think that ties right into, because we do a lot of those spring crops or fall seeded cereal crops that we do take for forage. And I would say it's a very similar process to what we have to manage in the warm season grasses as well, from a sorghum, pearl millet type standpoint. And one of the ways that we try to combat that, John, is that we try to do a very good job of managing soil fertility, soil nutrition, so that plant has a healthy base to start with. When people hear the word nitrates, and so thank goodness to some of the stuff, the content that I follow on the Hay Kings Facebook page, I try to watch and see what's going on in the forage community.
Yeah.
But I've actually seen posts where people maybe have been a little bit misinformed and had a bad experience before. So unfortunately, we've all had this thing called misinformation in our life at some point here. And I've seen posts where people will say, don't plant sorghum sudan grass, it'll kill your cows. Okay. There are things that we have management issues with that can lead to health problems in beef, horses, sheep, goats, anything that's going to eat it, right? So it's more of a management thing, if you will, versus sorghum will kill your cows. That's not true. But I have seen, just random comments out there, and that probably makes a lot of people go, whoa, I was thinking about that, but maybe not today. Nitrates can be an issue, but they don't have to be. When we have these drought scenarios and a plant's going under an extreme amount of stress, yes, they kind of shut down. And it can cause some nitrate issues. Also, when we have a rain event and it rains for the first few days, that plant's going to feel really good, really vibrant, healthy. There might be some nitrogen in the soil, and it's going to feel good and just suck it up real quick. That we don't have enough time for conversion now, and we can have a nitrate spike right after a good rain. So A lot of guys try to keep that in mind. Well, it rained. Yes, we've got to wait till it dries before we can get out there and cut the crop. But we also need to keep in mind that a couple extra days might be helpful to get that plant to utilize the nitrogen that just absorbed as well. So then there's that little lag period just to be aware of. I've also had people say, well, if I'm going to have nitrates in my sorghum crop, I just won't fertilize. That'll solve it. Don't put any nitrogen out there. So I'm going to give you an
Sounds
example.
like a good plan.
Yeah, well, right. So when we give fertility recommendations, we will tell people, okay, your warm season grass crop is probably going to need about 1 pound of nitrogen for every day that it's going to grow for that cutting sequence. So if you're doing a hay grazer style, that you're going to do multiple cuts. If you plan to cut at 45 days, let's plan to have 45 units of nitrogen available for that cutting period. We're going to balance that nitrogen on a 5-to-1 ratio with sulfur so we can make a protein molecule, because we need sulfur and nitrogen to make protein. So I joke that I was not the best student in organic chemistry, but there's one of those things that I have to remember every day, that you do need those two things to make a protein. So we balance 5-to-1. So if we have 45 pounds of nitrogen, we're going to need 9 pounds of sulfur to go with it. Okay, so that's a very, very key component right there, just to help limit our nitrate exposure. I've worked with people where I've given them this presentation and talked to them about it till you're blue in the face. And then I'll get a phone call one year and a guy go, hey, Jackson, I planted some of this sorghum Sudan grass and the nitrates in my first cutting are through the roof. And they kind of are gouging you a little bit, poking about the product. And I said, yep, Todd, and I'll bet you put on 100 units of nitrogen because you didn't want to go split apply and do it twice, and you cut it at 50 days. Yeah, well, yeah, you caught me. We did it. Yes, we just didn't want to go do 2 apps. How'd the second cutting do? Yeah, no problem at all. Okay, so again, we luxury consumed nitrogen in 45 days. It used maybe, let's say it picked up 70 pounds, and it could only use 2/3 of it. So now we have a high nitrate feed. Now, your oats point. So story time. I'm in Nebraska doing a grower meeting, sitting in this long VFW hall, whatever it was, talking, and I'm talking about nitrates. And I said, okay, guys, we did a little study down in Kansas where we did no fertilizer. The next block was 20 units of nitrogen. Next range was 50 units of nitrogen. Third range was 75 units of nitrogen. Then we came back and we did those same N rates, but we balanced the whole fertility program. So we did 20, 50, 70 with sulfur, with a little bit of potassium, with some phosphorus. Okay. What we found in those studies is that where we did not fertilize at all was actually higher nitrates than when we put 20, 50, 70 pounds of straight N on.
I'm listening.
Our suspicion is that the plant found whatever free nitrate it could find in the soil, picked it up, but then it wasn't quite healthy enough to do anything with it. So it actually held that nitrate in the plant and just said, okay, we're waiting. We're in a holding pattern now. What else are we going to get to eat? We need something to do here. And it just is actually higher nitrates.
Or it got cold or whatever.
Any of those things could have happened. Unhealthy plant, like you said. It didn't feel good, didn't use the nitrate. The sweet spot literally was 50 pounds of N with the sulfur and everything else. We went from 3,000 parts per million down to 500 in that same field by balancing the nutrition profile. And we'll get to those numbers next. That'll be one of the next
things. We haven't
things.
talked about those concentrations yet.
500 is literally nothing. But okay, so I'm telling this story. Got a chart up on the board. Gentlemen with, not putting them in an age group, but a lot of years of experience. One of those guys said, hey, can I share my story? And at first you go, okay, this is live TV. Don't hurt me. Yes, go ahead and share your story, sir. He's like, same thing happened to my neighbors and I. A couple years ago, we all planted spring oats. I followed your recommendations from the last time we talked. I fertilized my oats. I balanced the NPK sulfur. I planted my sorghum following that. I did a great job of following the recommendations, right? Neighbor down the road did not, he fertilized his oats, but he did not fertilize his sorghum sudan grass. My other neighbor down the road didn't fertilize at all, planted oats, followed oats with sorghum sudan grass. So that's setting the stage. He goes, I'm sitting in the road ditch fixing fence one day, and neighbor B drives by and catches me. He goes, oh my gosh, you better go check your sorghum. I was just talking to Henry down the street, and his nitrates and his sorghum and his oats are just out of this world. We better check and make sure we're doing okay. So once they started comparing notes, the guy that didn't fertilize at all had high nitrate oats, had high nitrate sorghum sudan grass. The gentleman that fertilized his oats had really good oats and just borderline on nitrates in his sorghum sudan grass because it wasn't quite enough to keep it going. The gentleman that followed the program on his oats and his sorghum sudan grass, of course, he's telling the story. It's a big grin on his face and said, that story has worked for me on my place every time since then. So there's something to fertilizing, taking care of that crop. Yes, drought will impact it more. Yes, a heavy rain or rain to make it feel better after a drought will impact it as well. So nitrates can be kind of a weird thing to chase, but we know ways around managing it. So,
what I just heard you tell me is that balancing the fertilizer is and applying fertilizer where you're going to get yield and production because that's what comes with fertilizer.
Yeah,
is super important.
it's very
And
important.
You're less likely to have less likely.
Correct.
We're not going to be absolute about any.
There are no absolutes.
There are no absolutes in this world, but you're less likely to have
Yes.
nitrate issues than if you even don't fertilize at all. But that assumes some baseline fertility in the soil and
That's assuming some other things. Yes, because literally a guy's going to throw on here, well, yeah, but I could follow a legume crop and not have to put any nitrate out there or nitrogen and it's going to be fine. You're probably right. You can, there's a lot of nitrogen credits. Maybe you applied a bunch on your oats crop ahead of time or a small grain crop and it didn't rain and it's still stored in the soil. Good point. Get it. 100%. Those things work. But those are the exceptions to the rule we're talking about. The other thing would be is that whole part about if you're going to do multiple cuts, don't throw it all out there at one time.
Yep.
If you are going to do a single cut, just like any other crop, you could put your nitrogen all out there up front. It'll probably be fine. Could you split apply and use that nitrogen more efficiently for that season-long 90 or 100-day growth? Yes, absolutely. If you can side dress or put some on an irrigation, that's going to be more efficient. But that crop, if you're going to go full silage cutting, 100 days, put it all out there because you're not harvesting it too early. So anyway, to the numbers.
Stabilized nitrogen.
Nitrogen stabilizer, go ahead. Absolutely.
Then you can dump. Oh, I hadn't thought about it.
I would still be cautious on that multiple cuts, putting a stabilizer on and assuming that it's going to be stabilized right, that it doesn't use too much.
Right. I mean, your timing has to be like dead nuts.
It would have to be impeccable. And I have not studied that to a level to say anything more than just be cautious and don't count on it. So to the numbers, here's another tricky thing. There are 2 different nitrate tests that are reported with different numbers. So the one I'm going to refer to is parts per million. And there's another chart out there that the numbers are significantly lower. And you're going to look at the 2 and go, well, what he said doesn't make sense because my sample results say this. The one I have in front of me right now is in parts per million nitrate levels.
And that's what I'm familiar with.
Yes. 1,000 parts per million or less, you're safe under all conditions. Okay. You get up to 1,000 to 1,500, it says nitrate levels are safe for non-pregnant animals. For pregnant animals, you should probably limit their feed to 50% of the ration. Okay. 1,500 to 2,000. It's safe to go total dry matter intake up to 50% for almost all animals. So then that includes the next level of feeding class of livestock in there. You get to 2,000 to 3,500. feed should be limited to 35 or 40% of the total dry matter intake, but do not feed that to pregnant animals. So again, we have some fetus damage in there if you get too high levels of nitrates. 3,500 to 4,000, limit to 25% of the dry matter intake, do not feed pregnant animals. 4,000 or above, it says do not feed, but let's just be clear. The solution to pollution is dilution.
Yep.
The more you dilute it, the factor will help you. So we talk about that. I was having a discussion with a guy from North Dakota a couple years ago. He's talking about his sorghum Sudan grass being high in nitrates. I was like, well, don't worry about it. Just go ahead, bale it. The solution to pollution is dilution. And he stopped me with this very stark look on his face and said, every feed stuff we have today is high in nitrates. I can't blend high nitrate with high nitrate to make low nitrate. I'm sorry, it doesn't work. And then you go, yeah, that's a pretty tough situation because the small grains were high. The warm season grasses were high in nitrates. Any corn they were going to chop was going to be high in nitrates. And it's like,
No,
yeah, okay.
there's something to be said that you just said there that caught my attention a little bit. And we'll get back to concentrations because that we need
That's
to put
good.
an exclamation point on that. But you just talked about small grains. I talked about cool season grasses. You talked about warm season grasses. And corn, all of these things can have high nitrates.
Yes.
And I just thought back to a story that I heard in Western Washington where it's wet and but they got kind of droughty 2 years ago. And I know a producer that lost cows because the hay that he purchased was north of 3,000.
Yeah. So
Bad situation.
So what do we do about that, man? We're growing it out there. How can we manage the crop that we have? First of all, people, I would suggest for everybody, if you're even questioning it, right? $20 test.
Yep.
Send in some plant material. Give yourself peace of mind. Don't just do one.
Can that be a foliar test before harvest and then like a sample out of a bale, a traditional forage analysis?
Yeah, I would suggest taking a sample pre-harvest, send it in, find out where you're at ahead of time so you can make a plan. Because it's easier to plan up front and do a few things to mitigate it than to end up with a whole stored harvested yard full of feed and then go, okay, now what? So
I have to buy something that's low nitrate and
right.
And maybe I have to go buy a tub grinder to do that. Like, yeah.
So what are the things we can do to help ourselves? First thing would be is to test so you know where you're at pre-harvest. Don't just send in one sample because different parts of the field, you have different soil types, different organic matter, different fertility, all that stuff matters. So multiple samples would be good just so you know, okay? Because you don't also want to have one that comes back really good and you assume the whole field's the same way. And then you might have got into a weird golden area that you didn't know was that good and everything else is bad. Just think about what you're doing that way. So what do we do? If you have a plant, it'd be great to have the pictorial with us right now, but if you were to break that thing apart in plant pieces and parts, the highest concentration of nitrate in all those plants would be the lower third of the stem, and the stem only, lower third.
So cut height. We're back
Cutting
to
height. Cutting height can impact it. So I've seen this breakout done on a corn plant where they took a plant, whole plant test comes back. Let's just use example 3,500 parts per million, and that puts us in that category to limit to 25% of your forage intake. Okay, 3,500 parts per million. We know it's borderline. Let's not feed it. If you pulled all the leaves off and sampled those separately, 50, 60 parts per million.
Completely.
Literally nothing gets transferred into the leaves from a nitrate standpoint. Top third of the stalk might be 200-300 parts per million. Middle part of the stalk might be 500 to 1,000. Bottom part could be 8,000. Hypothetically. I mean, when you talk about doing a whole plant sample and getting 3,500, but that bottom third is where the highest concentration is that basically pollutes everything above it. So cutting height is important. So for the guy that's already cutting his corn silage a little high so he can improve the fiber digestibility, that's probably a good thing. So you're going to lose a little tonnage, but you're going to have a better quality feed to feed. So leave some nitrates in the field. Don't take them to the yard. Or adjust according to what you have for feedstuffs, how you're going to blend it. I mean, there's this whole equation you can run in your mind that says, well, yeah, that's great information, but I could cheat the system a little bit by doing this, this, and this. Yes, that's true.
Yeah. Oh, before you go, I have a whole bunch of hay from last year that's still sitting around. I know it's low nitrate. We tested it. Let's drop that rule, right?
Okay, so cutting height.
All of those things matter.
If you're doing dry feed versus wet feed also matters.
Yeah.
If you cut your crop and it dries and the nitrate is in that plant as it dries, you have high nitrates in that crop. If you have a crop that can be fermented, so fermented properly, we're going to say probably 65% moisture to 72% moisture. Good fermentation.
Whether it's corn or haylage or whatever.
Corn, haylage, wheat silage, oat silage, sorghum sudan grass silage, all of those, or baled wet.
On putting up silage, not we're cutting it for hay. Oh shoot, the test came back high. It's already a little too dry. Okay, just making sure. Yeah,
so dry hay doesn't lose much of a nitrate compound. Wet hay, depending on which study you read. So I'm going to throw these numbers out there. 30 to 40% of the nitrate level could be reduced by proper fermentation in a wet stored feed. Okay, so if you're at 3,000 and we can take 30% out, we're going to drop it to 2,000.
I mean, that totally changes the game.
That totally changes the game because now you're going from 25% and you're going to increase up to 50% of the ration could be fed with that product. So just by harvesting wet feed, which at times can be higher quality because you get more plant material, you don't have to go through dry down, harvest loss, all those kind of things. You're hauling moisture, but you could actually have a higher quality product, better palatability, lower nitrates.
Yep.
So fermentation, cutting height are the two big things to manage from a harvest standpoint to help reduce nitrates. So that kind of rounds out some of the nitrate discussion, but take some samples ahead of time, know what you're getting into. And by all means, yes, if you don't get it done ahead of time, obviously before feed out or it goes in the TMR, you need to know what you're feeding. Yeah. Okay. So now again, I'm going to throw the grazing thing into you. What if you have a high nitrate sorghum sudan grass crop out there? You just tested the plant and it's 3,000 parts per million and it's making you nervous, but you want to graze it. How do you do that? So
on this.
If you're running longhorn cattle and you could train those horns to go down and give you a grazing limiter, you wouldn't be able to graze the bottom third of that stalk. So that's probably the best advice I've got, right?
What I just heard you say though, that's less of a joke because if you're pushing them through really fast, grazing the tops of the plants, you're probably okay.
Right. So also consider if you turn cows out into a sorghum sudan grass, any grass patch, cornfield, whatever it's going to be, they're never going to go grab the bottom of that stalk and start munching at the bottom. They're going to nibble and graze the top stuff off. The leaves are going to come again, 50 parts per million. We're going to take leaves off 100 parts per million, 200 parts per million, the top of the stem. We're going to work our way down their body, their system, their stomach components, the microflora that's in there. It's all going to slowly adjust as well. So you can get by with grazing very, very effectively on most of these crops, as long as you keep in your mind that we're not going to send them in there hungry so they gorge themselves and eat a bunch of stalk. We're going to let them take some time to graze down, acclimate a little bit, and maybe leave 8 or 10 inches of stubble out there so you can get good regrowth. and you're not forcing them to eat a high nitrate portion of the plant. So, I mean, there's a lot of reason in there that says it's not a problem. We just need to be aware of it, know how to manage it, talk about it, test for it a little bit. It's going to be fine. It's all good.
And the reality is, these aren't everyday problems. You don't plant this crop expecting to have these problems. It's when you do get those stresses. It's when you over fertilize. It's when you don't balance your fertilizer. It's like there's a reason that you're having these problems that should give you a hint that you need to test.
You should know ahead of time. And right now, with some of the dry weather we have, the guys that are in those drier, droughttier situations, yeah, it's logical. Make sure you do a nitrate test. That plant is under an extreme amount of stress. So
yep.
There's going to be somebody that watches this and says, don't plan on it. Hell, I'm the guy that plans on it 99% of the time, and I'm just happy when it doesn't show up.
Well, and now that I'm thinking about it, my pearl millet hasn't had a drop of rain since first cutting. So now I'm thinking,
just
it's not a good situation going into. We're going to test it. I mean, it's going to get cut and harvested the same way, no matter what happens. But we're going to test it before it gets sold down the road to make sure that it's safe.
And then again, use good sampling techniques when you're out there with your bale core. And your sample's as good as the operator, right? So do the best you can.
Yep.
So nitrates in a nutshell, buddy.
Now we talked about a lot of little things there, but there's some big themes we can pull out of there.
Yeah.
The nitrate concentration isn't the same clear throughout the plant.
Correct.
So we can manage that way.
Yep.
And siling high nitrate crops helps. There's something that causes that problem. And it's always a stressor on the plant.
Right.
Cold weather, too hot, too dry, something extreme is going on. You're never like when you can't get hay dry because it's raining every 3 days, you're probably not going to have those problems, right?
Most likely, right? Yeah. It's in pretty good shape. It's feeling healthy.
Did I miss any of the major points there? Oh, and then the concentrations. Knowing those concentrations and knowing the higher the concentration, the less of it you can put in a ration. And I mean, the prudent thing to do is to ask a nutritionist, send that feed test over to a nutritionist and say, hey, I think I have a problem here. It's cheaper to pay your one nutritionist than to have one cow die. And that's completely within the realm of possibility on nitrates.
All day long, man. That's the simple message right there. One head of livestock or a pen of calves that are off feed for a couple days or reduce their dry matter intake and their rate of gain from 3 pounds to 1.5 pounds. That's a big deal.
And those are things that you will see with nitrate. Like, it's going to stress the animal out.
So talk to the vet, talk to the nutritionist, get that ration balanced appropriately. Yep. Do a good job. Keep them consistent.
Yep. All right. Well, we'll wrap this up here. And as usual, where do you want to send folks for more information?
Hey, so Cropland stuff is at www.cropland.com. If you want to follow the Forage Fanatic, we do some social media stuff on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, all those fun things at Forage Fanatic. And that's where you'll catch a lot of this content. And then again here at the Hey Kings Connections YouTube.
Now, the other advertising I want to do, University Extension Services have a ton of information on nitrates. Don't let us be the world experts on nitrates. There's folks with PhDs out there that have done a tremendous amount of research, and it's really easy to find. All you have to do is type Google forage and nitrates.
Absolutely. So I'm glad that you brought that up because you're right. They did all the hard work. They went through all the research, put the charts together. We're just trying to be messengers here today to get everything going so we can all utilize it and remind people that it's out there. Absolutely.
Yep. And as usual, for more of this kind of content, you can go to hey-kings.com, check out podcasts. You can go to the Hey Kings Facebook group and participate there.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.